Yes, so maybe to just give you a little bit of overview, because the question just got to Ash. I've been working 7 years. I was a teacher before for 6 years. So as you can see, you really can come from different backgrounds. Like Ash wanted to be a cook and architect. I wanted to be a teacher. And the thing is, I started actually in QA then. So I even did another step. I started as a tester in a games company in Germany called Deck 13. And they were a failing studio. We did some adventure games. And then we started working on a new game called Lords of the Fallen, and I started doing level design on that game, and it won the German Games Award for game design. So it was a hit game, it was amazing, but it's not my proudest project. My proudest project is actually Blood Knights. It has a Metacritic score of 49. So it's a really awful game, but why is it my proudest project? Because I learned the most from this project. Because I failed, and I failed again, and I failed again. And everything I do nowadays, I can go back to that. I have killed games in other studios. So this is a really good learning I took from there. And basically, as Ash said, a game designer can come from anywhere. He can come from being a cook or wanting to be a cook. He can come from being a teacher. And the reason for that is game design is a profession, but we have many different roles actually in game design. So how I like to say it is from Lord of the Rings. You have one profession to rule them all, because Ash will agree game design is the best profession in gaming. Like, there's no question. And you have many roles to bind all the people who trust us that game design is the best profession and then are bound to companies to work in these roles. So you have gameplay designers, quest designers, live ops, level designers, system designers. You could break them down even more, but this is a good overview of the roles you have. And I want to go with you through these roles and what they're actually doing in a game studio. So the first one is the easy one. It's the gameplay designer. And if you look, I love really this quote by Chris Crawford, who is an old designer. He worked like in the 80s on games, and he got really bitter and went out of the games industry. So, but he gave this great example of a refrigerator. So a refrigerator has mechanics. If I open the door, it's easy. The light goes on. It's like a surprise party for me. I see the light. And I can close the door, and I can do this all the time. These are the mechanics of a refrigerator. The problem is it's not fun. Like, even though there are mechanics, they're not fun. So there must be something more instead of just mechanics. And actually, when something becomes fun, it's when it's challenging my abilities of what I can do. So we have this nice thing, and here comes my psychology background. We have this nice thing called the flow state. What is the flow state? If you ever driven a motorcycle, if you ever climbed a mountain, if you ever driven a car, or if you played a game like Tetris, for example, you have this state where you're not thinking about what you're doing. You're just having fun. You don't have to think what you're doing. You're just playing, you're just driving a bike, you're just climbing the mountain. And the reason for this is because it's just the right moment for your skill. So if a mountain is too tough, if I try to climb the Mount Everest, I will get really anxious because it's way too tough for me. If I try to climb over this box, it's way too easy, I will be bored. So actually what a gameplay designer does, he tries that you will be in this flow state all the time, because that's fun. And the challenge with this is, as you can see, the longer the time goes, the better I will get at something. So we have to also make the challenge higher for the player. So when I start training to climb a mountain, at the beginning it's hard for me, but I get better at it, so I have to go to more challenging mountains. And another thing the gameplay designer actually does, he defines the controls of a game. So he has to really see that whatever you do in the game is easy to control, easy to understand. It can be for hardcore gamers, like this example from God of War. It can be just touch controls on a phone. But the thing he has to do is, whatever I want to do as a player, I need to be able to easily do that. Because if I have to think about it, I get anxious, and then I might get even bored because I'm like, yeah, this is not fun. And another thing for the gameplay designer is, this is an example from Call of Duty, but you could take other action games. This is what goes on in the head of a player. So if a player sees an enemy, he does all these things. So the enemy shoots at me. Should I hide? Should I throw a grenade? Is he maybe really close? Should I do a melee attack? Or do I hide behind a cover? And this happens in seconds. This doesn't happen like for a minute. This happens in like 5 to 10 seconds. So we as a gameplay designer actually have to see that the player can have these thoughts and have fun. If we make it too challenging in these moments, then he won't have fun. Then he again becomes anxious. If we make it too easy in these moments, If the enemy is, for example, not even moving, then again, it's too boring. So this is what a gameplay designer also takes care of. So what does a gameplay designer do? He creates controls that are really intuitive and that don't break immersion. Because imagine I have to always look down at the controller of what do I have to do. In that moment, I'm breaking my view of the game. In that moment, I'm completely breaking my immersion to the game. So he makes sure, like we said, that you're in the flow state, that the game is challenging. And he's also responsible that your gameplay that you're creating is fitting your core loop. So what is your core loop? A core loop in a game is actually, when you break down a game, you can really break it down to its essential, to its core. So if you have a role-playing game, you basically could break it down to what is a role-playing game. It's you defeat enemies, you will get a reward, and that reward will help you to level up, and then you will defeat enemies again, because now you can defeat stronger enemies, you will get a reward, and so on and so on. So the gameplay has to fit that. If I would never fight enemies in the gameplay, I would break the core loop. So the gameplay designer has always to see that the core loop is not being broken. And since we're talking about RPGs right now, a quest narrative designer is also really important. I love that example because what Gandalf does in Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit is Gandalf is the perfect narrative and quest designer. Because he sends the hobbits on a journey, be it to bring the ring somewhere, be it to follow these dwarves. It's always an easy task in the beginning and it gets harder, harder, harder. So Gandalf is basically the perfect quest designer. And a quest could, for example, be like in Monty Python and the Holy Grail. In order to pass through these woods, you must find a shrubbery. So what does he do? He gives tasks. And these tasks need to be really clearly defined. I need to always understand what a player has to do. So in this example of The Witcher, it's the story of family matters about a baron. And tasks are like follow the baron, find the palace hut, kill the bandits. And at the same time, while the player does these tasks, he experiences a story. That's why it's a quest and a narrative designer. Also, a narrative and quest designer will create characters. And he will try to make the player feel like he can be himself, like he can express himself in a game. For example, through dialogue. So you see this dialogue with Ambassador Odina from Mass Effect, and the answers are basically the same answer. It's, she's right, it's true, it's not far-fetched. It's the same answer. But why are these three options there? There's a little bit like one is more serious, one is more joking, so the player can express which character he's playing in the game. And that's really important for a quest and narrative designer, that he can make this player feel like he's himself in the game. Because if we do that, then our game becomes this. Then our game can become this epic adventure, this fantasy the player has in his head. So when he starts playing The Witcher in this, and he has heard about The Witcher 4, then he has this fantasy in his head of fighting harpies, of living these grand adventures. So that's what we need to do actually as a narrative designer. So you create meaningful tasks, and this is the most important point, meaningful tasks. And this is often done wrong. Whoever done fetch quests in a game knows what I'm speaking of. Witcher does the best fetch quests because they actually have a meaning in the story. But it's not only in role-playing games, it can even be in mobile games. You can make tasks actually meaningful for your experience. You create the history and the narrative of the game. It can be lore, it can be characters. It can even be, if you play Candy Crush actually has a story in their game that you're living through. So even there, you create some kind of lore for the game. And you need to follow certain storytelling structures and principles. So there's the 3-act structure. Star Wars is the perfect example of a 3-act structure. You slowly go like a roller coaster, higher, higher, higher. And the biggest drop is when the Death Star is destroyed. So a narrative designer has to see that the narrative of the game also follows the structure. And he works closely with other design roles, actually. So imagine your narrative is you have a pacifist, and your gameplay designer decides, but the next level is him killing a lot of people. Then there's like a problem between you two, and you have to talk about it. Since I said already, tasks can also be for mobile games, tasks can also be for live games. There's another designer that's a more modern version of a game designer. It's a live ops designer. It's what I'm doing at the moment. If you recently played Top 11, which I'm actually the designer, or one of the designers on, we had this challenge, the Asian Tour Challenge. And what it is like next to your normal gameplay, you will actually play against some teams from Asia to get some special rewards in the game. So why do we do this? Why do we need a live ops designer? Because nowadays, we aren't in an information age, we are in an entertainment age. So we all believe, or it's always said, we are in an information age. That's wrong. What do you use your cell phone for? You have the biggest library in the world, like the Library of Alexandria would like be envious of this library in your pocket. And you make photos of yourself for Instagram, you look up some stuff on YouTube, so you're always looking for entertainment instead of for information. Because actually players nowadays, especially with multiplayer games, with live games, are this. They are the cat in front of you, looking at you and telling you, I'm bored, please do something. It's your job to entertain me. And that is what a live ops designer does. So a live ops designer actually tries to entertain the player all the time, to keep him in the game, to keep the game sustainable. So you can do it like they did in Call of Duty, where you give double XP. You can look at Destiny, where they gave different costumes for Halloween, and it's like the Party of the Dead. You can give new story content with gameplay, like Final Fantasy did. But that is basically what a live ops designer does. He always tries to entertain people so they will stay in the game and don't look for another entertainment. So, he creates new content. This is really important. He listens to the community and he understands problems that hinders their games as a service experience. So what's games as a service? Games as a service means Netflix is a service for movies, for example. You have Wikipedia, which is a service for information. And games as a service is games are a service for entertainment, for playing games. So it's a service to the player. So we need to really understand, why are they not having fun in our game? How can we change that? We need to listen to them. And that's the boring part of being a live ops designer. You have to look at a lot of data. And you have to draw the right conclusions from it. So if I see players are only using, for example, let's say I'm doing a multiplayer shooter, they're only using this weapon. Or they're not picking up this item. Then I really have to think about, why are they doing it? What's the problem in our game? And I can read it actually from data. And he also works closely with other roles. A role we often work with, for example, is system design. And we try really to keep the game sustainable. Like Top 11 is now going in its 10th year. So you really try to keep a game sustainable as a live ops designer. Level designer. Really, really important. And I love the quote, God is in the details. So why did I actually pick St. Sava Church? Because we as human beings are explorers. We are adventurers. So if we see, for example, St. Sava Church, we see it a little bit behind this hill. We already want to know what's happening there behind this hill. And we also, when we're exploring the world, we're always looking for monuments that we can find, that we can orient ourselves on. So what a level designer actually does is similar to what happens in the real world. We are trying to give them an adventure they can explore. And it usually starts like this. So usually you will start, if you're doing a level, to scribble it on paper. You will maybe, this is for example a multiplayer map, you will have a spawn point, you will have a coffee shop, and that's what you start doing. You really scribble, like an architect, you scribble on a paper. Then you will create a model. Some architects create models, we also create models. It's basically, we call it gray boxing. So we will basically have boxes that are already starting to form a level, and we place some enemies. And this is the most important part, because this is where already your iteration comes in. Level designers play their levels even in this form a lot. They will start playing this again and again and again. Why? They want to see, are the enemies at the right position? Does the level even make sense? Is the door here maybe wrong? Is there a hole in my level? When you're building a level, and it happened to me a million times when I was building levels for Lords of the Fallen, I would walk around the corner and I would fall in a hole and be stuck, because I somehow forgot to put something there. And also, is there maybe a problem for the AI? So maybe I placed something and the AI is running against the bush and cannot go past it. So I have to also look at this. And this is already done in the gray boxing area. Why? Imagine you would produce all the assets, all the graphics for this game, and then you start finding out these things. You would waste a lot of money, actually. And if all works well, you then create this, and it's this amazing looking castle in the background. Remember St. Sava Church? It's the same thing. You will want to go there, and you will do another thing. So another thing level designers do, they actually tell a story. So they place these bodies on this pillar there to tell a story, because they're looking to this church. So there's a story there that the player can get in his head and think about what is actually the meaning of it. So what do level designers do? They build worlds for the player to be immersed in. They challenge them there, and they make sure there are no exploits and holes. They tell stories, they place the AI, and they watch that there are no blockers. And the most important thing, they follow actually the rules of architecture and interior design. And this is really important. Often, if you play a game and a level feels wrong, it's probably because someone didn't follow architecture and interior design rules, because there is like shape of rooms and these kind of things that actually have a meaning behind it. And most importantly, they're usually knowledgeable in different game engines, because they have to be really flexible in what they build, and prototyping techniques. And before you even gray box, there's an amazing prototyping technique for level designers, which is Legos. So you can build already levels with Legos. Hideo Kojima, one of the best designers of all time, when he created Metal Gear Solid, I think it was either 1 or 2, he created the levels with Legos beforehand to really see the layout of enemies and everything. And my favorite designer, the system and economy designer, the one where I'm always, if I talk to them, don't understand anything. And they are basically trying to create systems. So similar to A Beautiful Mind, you will look at them, you're like, you're amazing, but I don't get what you're doing. And because what they strive for is to find the perfect system. And their problem is, like Salvador Dali says, have no fear of perfection, because you will never reach it. So they are reaching for something they will never get. And if you remember, so to give you an overview of what a system designer does, if you remember our core game loop, defeat enemies, reward, level up, they will actually build systems for that. So you will fight, this will cost you stamina and gather wings, you will then gain resources, this is your reward, and this will be rupees, mana, leveling materials, crafting materials, and you will increase in power, which again will drain rupees, mana, leveling materials, crafting materials. This is a system. This is what's happening in this core loop. The problem is, if they only do this, this might be fun for some time, but would get boring really quick. And that's, if you remember A Beautiful Mind, this is what A Beautiful Mind looks like in a game. They create a lot of systems. So they will be like, okay, for increasing power, you can power up dragons, you can power up worm prints, power up weapons. For fighting, you will have campaigns, recurring events, and so on. You have gain resources, battle rewards, item guides. So this are like a lot of systems they have to take care of. And you could now open each system, and there would be systems beneath the system. So that's what a system designer does. He really goes for perfection, but he really has to create a lot of formulas and these kind of things. And to give another example from Call of Duty Mobile, for example, and PUBG Mobile. So if we want to create a competitor to this game, a systems designer would actually analyze these games and look at what they're doing. So this is cosmetic item drop rates, and he would look like, okay, if low value cosmetic items are in this game, what's their drop rate, what could we do, what's their drop rate for mid value, and so on. So he is also looking at systems in other games to see what he could do in our game as a system. So a systems economy designer creates, balances, and tunes system. And tune is really important, because remember I said you will never reach perfection. So you will tune your system all the time, because the balance that might have worked 2 days ago, you might have made some gameplay changes in the game, totally new balance that you have to find out. And also they do matchmaking, fighting systems, rules, and also often script AI. Usually they have an engineering or mathematics background. That's why I'm not a systems designer. That's why Ash is not a systems designer, because we don't have the background for it. And they really need to still closely work together with the other game design roles. So imagine you have a system that really doesn't work with your gameplay. Imagine you have a system that doesn't work with our live ops design. Then you again have a problem that the game won't be fun. And since they often write scripts, like I already mentioned, it's really good for a systems designer to also know programming languages. It's really important. Imagine you're scripting an AI behavior. After an attack, how many seconds does he need to react, and so on. Then you need to write a script for it. And the one thing you heard me talk about a lot is you have to work with different roles, actually. So game designers work really closely together. Even though they're different roles, they usually work really closely together because there's actually common ground between them. So if I'm, as a live ops designer, create live ops for a game, like create a new feature for a game, I will have to talk to a systems designer for the systems I want for this new feature in the game. And also if this feature I create, let's say the Asia tour, so I want to have the opponent difficulty, I need the systems designer. If in the Asia tour I will also have some tasks for the player, I need to talk to our quest designer actually about it. So we will intertwine, and the quest designer will talk with the system designer. Hey, what are you giving as a reward for this task so I can write the right story for this task? So they are always intertwining actually in this. And in smaller studios it might even be that you have to be 2 of these roles or 3 of these roles. Because there's actually common ground in all these roles. Ash already mentioned it. As a game designer, there's certain things you need to have. And there's also certain things that are expected of you when you become a game designer. So it's expected of you to be really good at research. You need to be good researchers and analyzers, and you need to be passionate about it. If you're not passionate about looking at data, even if it can become boring, if you're not passionate about looking up 500 weapons for a medieval game, then this is not the profession for you. And I'm really serious about it. I had to look at Lords of the Fallen. I had to look at 600, 700 weapons sometimes. And it's important. You have to be really good at documentation. That's something many people underestimate, that you need to be really good at documentation. Because you will write documents and you need to formulate your ideas and your designs to people that are not game designers. So you will talk to product managers, you will talk to publishers, you will talk to artists, engineers, all with different backgrounds and different understandings. And engineers, usually someone really logical. Game designers can be really illogical sometimes. But your document has to speak to them. It has to speak a common language for everyone, and that's really hard in documentation. So don't underestimate, a game designer has to do a lot of documentation. And this is maybe the most important thing, you need to be versatile. So, as Milos already mentioned, I did a lot of different roles in my career. I've been a quest designer. I've designed levels, I did live ops, I did prototyping, and the reason for that is you will specialize in a role after a while. So for the last few years I've usually been a live ops designer, but you need to understand the other roles you're going to work with. You have to have a knowledge of these roles. If I'm talking to a level designer and really don't understand what he's doing, I will make demands of him that he cannot follow. So if I'm as a live ops designer telling him, yeah, and build this big world for me, he will be like, yeah, you have to be more specific. But also, and this is especially true for smaller studios, you might have to do multiple of these roles. So you will usually, in your career, you will become good, really good at one thing, but you need to be also broad in the other things. So it's like a T, basically. And the important thing is, I worked, for example, in a small studio with 20 people. There I did a lot of things. I worked in a studio with 1,000 people. There I just did screens for some time. So it's really different. So just to conclude, there are many different roles. You can still put them under the umbrella of a game designer, and a really good game designer understands all these roles and is really amazing at least one of these roles. Thank you.